Today we're looking at Diamine's Deep Magenta. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Diamine's Deep Magenta, as it sounds, is kind of a magenta color, which you would sort of expect. To make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a Retro 51 Tornado with a broad nib. I said tornado because I'm thinking like Zorro with tornado. Before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. And up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately dunk it in a water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see that this ink immediately pushes up the page, leaving a very light pink behind until that magenta starts coming up. Nothing really spectacular, no mixing of colors here. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dump it into water. We see there's a little bit of more hold on, sort of, with that bottom line, but not a whole lot. Then that kind of pink pushes up to the magenta kind of purpley range. It's kind of that, it's odd, it's a magenta, but it's kind of purpley, you know, the lilac. I know I called it magenta in the very beginning, but maybe it's leaning purpley. We'll see. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Diamine's Deep Magenta has an average viscosity of 1.56, which makes it a wetter ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper with the extra fine and medium nib. For the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Diamine's Deep Magenta has an average dry time of 12 seconds, which makes it a faster drying ink. Another ink with a very wet that's very wet, but dries faster. It's really remarkable to see how these things seem to correlate. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a medium, and a Jinhao X750 with an extra fine. Let's look at Clairefontaine. Okay. With the exception of where I was putting down some scrubby, we don't get any bleed. And we don't get ghosting. The scrubby I don't really consider as a big deal when it comes to bleed through because I'm putting it down stupid thick. The 1.1. We get no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no color variation. Now I'm going to see this a lot through this ink. When you're using wetter pens, it loses that color variation. The extra fine, a lighter tone than we had with the 1.1. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. Color variation. Very nice shading throughout this writing. 8 seconds to dry. The medium has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and yes, shading all the way through the writing sample. 14 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both the extra fine and the medium show us some color variation. The medium shows much more than the extra fine, and that's what we got in the writing sample. The smear says I could likely recover this if I did smear it while I was writing. So we look at Tomoe River, which gives us no bleeding. It does give ghosting. The 1.1 gives no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. Adjust to center. Thank you. It's a nice color. Magenta is not my color. This is actually pretty nice. If I was going to go for a magenta, this would be the one I go for, and we're going to see why in these writing samples. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade, 15 seconds to dry. The medium gives us no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade, and 22 seconds to dry. Now, the scrubby shows us we're not going to get color variation, and we didn't. The smear test says we're not going to be able to recover it, and I doubt we would. So I use Rhodia paper Rhodia gives us no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 gives no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. Just a nice magenta. Once again, not my color. The extra fine, a lighter tone, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. As we've seen a bunch of times, the Rhodia makes it lose its shading. We're not seeing shading in this writing. 10 seconds to dry. Medium has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no shade. 15 seconds to dry. The scrubby shows us not a lot of color variation, and the smear test says you can likely recover it. So, being a color that I don't necessarily go for, and an interesting color though, I decided to test it on different tone papers. And the first one being the yellow Rhodia. We see we have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1, actually, let's look at the color differences here. So it's funny because it becomes a little deeper with the 1.1. Still a little deeper and a little deeper, so that yellow makes it a little bit darker, which is, I think it looks really nice here. On the white paper, the magenta just doesn't do it for me. On Clairefontaine, we saw great shading, but you know, here it doesn't do it for me here. It's a much nicer color to me here. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. The extra fine has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, but it does start showing some shading. It starts showing little bits of shading in dog, in lazy, in over, in the 10. It's little, it's subtle, it's very nice to start getting some of that. Pretty neat. 10 seconds to dry. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, but it does show hints of shading from time to time. I see hints of shading going on with over, but it's going from a dark to a much darker on this tone. So it's only going a tone or two more, which isn't very much. It's like the difference between an H2 and an H3 pencil. The difference in tone is very, very minor, but it's nice. I see it with I see it in dog. It's nice. We actually do get some of the shading with the yellow paper. 15 seconds to dry. The scrubby shows us that if I look far left to far right of the extra fine and far left to far right of the medium, I do see some shading difference. It's just not huge, but it's very minor, very subtle. I'll call it an elegant shading. The scrubby says we could likely recover this. So I decided to test this on G-Lalo paper because I hadn't found too many, an ink at this point that looked good on this. So with this paper, we got no bleeding, no ghosting, but I'm looking at the color difference. I think this is the first ink on this paper that I think looks really nice. I think it looks really fantastic here. Better than it did on the yellow. I don't like how it looks on the white, but I don't care for a magenta. So the 1.1, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. The extra fine, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. It is a lighter tone, much lighter tone than we got with the 1.1. 3 seconds to dry. The medium, much darker tone. I think it's a little darker than I got with the 1.1. No feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. 8 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both the extra fine and the medium show us we're not going to get any color variation. We didn't. The smear test, you're probably not going to recover what you wrote, but I don't see you writing notes on this where the recovery's the big deal. And that's all that I have for the writing sample. Instead of finding inks that look like Diamine's Deep Magenta, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I've chosen Krishna's Empty because it's a very nice, very dark black. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Diamine's Deep Magenta? Magenta isn't a color that normally calls to me, but this ink does look good. It shades very nice. And on top of that, this is the very first ink I've used that looked good on that G. Lalo gray laid paper. That says a lot for this ink and how it performs, that even given that background, it has a standout, nice color. Thanks for watching.